Hi everyone, it's 5:02. How are you guys? I'm pretty jazzed because I'm going to be doing, I feel like I look all distorted from this angle, but what are you going to do? I'm pretty jazzed because I'm going to be doing an Instagram live with Mayor Pete, who is going to be joining us, I think from South Bend. And we're going to catch up with him to see how he's doing and what's been happening with him. I interviewed his husband, Chasten, a little bit to talk to Pete about all sorts of things, what he's been up to. Hey, Pete.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Nice to see you.
Same here. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, no, it's great to have you. And, you know, we got a lot of questions on social media, but of course, I have a million questions. And I know you're a policy wonk, and I love talking about public policy too. But first, let me just ask you some fun questions. How are you, and how are you handling this crazy time?
You know, everybody's having to adapt, and for me, it's just a little different because the lockdown happened almost exactly the same time that I was coming off the presidential campaign, both of which are, of course, just big changes. We were in constant movement. We would celebrate if the schedule showed that I was going to be in the same hotel room 2 nights in a row, because that felt like slowing down a little bit, or a sense of home. So to go from that to being pretty much locked down to being at home all the time is a huge shift, but one that we've been very fortunate. We've got a home, first of all. We've got access to food and everything we need. Close family members are healthy. And so really counting our blessings at a time like this, and also throwing myself into things I've been meaning to do for a long time, from arranging the home library here to just
I was going to say your bookshelf looks very organized, Pete.
Thank you. A lot of cursing went into assembling these bookcases, but another one just came in. It's going to go on that wall. So you know, a lot of domestic projects that have been waiting years to get done now that I've got a little more opportunity. But it's also gotten very busy. There's a lot to be done, and even though I don't get physically out of a very small radius, finding a lot of ways to stay involved and make a difference.
Well, a lot of people I know watching this wants to know about what you've been up to and the transition from candidate Pete to citizen Pete. How are you spending your time other than getting your bookshelves and your books in order? And by the way, it's nice to have a candidate who likes to read.
Well, I'd like to believe that that's table stakes for elected office, but I guess not everybody sees it that way. You know, part of what I've been doing is trying to connect the community of American mayors to researchers working on pandemic response, because what we know is a lot of the solutions to get anything done to be able to safely reopen really are going to require a lot of coordination with local leaders. Not only are we already seeing the way that mayors and governors have stepped up, but if we fast forward a little bit, think about what it'll take to get the level of testing required to really be safe when we reopen. Think about what it'll be like to do the kind of contact tracing we need. That's where you, when somebody tests positive, you work out who they've been in contact with and let them know they could be at risk and make sure they get tested. This is going to require a lot of interaction with local authorities, local nonprofits, and there's a unique role for mayors. So I've been involved helping mayors communicate with those who are working on solutions. And we've just created, on the political side, an effort called Win the Era. There's more information on wintheera.com. That is really about taking the ideas and the values of my campaign, the things that we cared about and focused on, and carrying those forward, whether it's issues that we want to focus on, like climate change, income inequality, and racial inequality in this country, or just backing candidates who I think have that same kind of energy, a commitment to generational leadership coming from different kinds of new and diverse sources of leadership that we really need to lift up. Knowing that even more than usual, in very important races that have nothing to do with the presidency are not going to get the attention they deserve.
Let's talk about sort of the federal response to all this. I know you have some pretty strong opinions, I imagine, about how the Trump administration has handled this crisis and why we're so far behind other countries when it comes to testing and really sort of figuring out how to control the spread, although great progress has been made. So I guess first off, how would you assess the administration's response?
You know, it's put our lives in danger. let's acknowledge that this would be a ferociously difficult issue for anybody to deal with, no matter who is in charge. But this administration has lost so many opportunities to help get ahead of this. A president saying it was under control when it was just getting started. The president really seeming to want to lead from behind in terms of saying, well, the governors will figure out how to get personal protective equipment or testing. They'll lead, and even saying, he's not a supply clerk. Well, what we need right now is some oversight and some frankly supply command is how we would think about it from a military perspective, to make sure that we have that national leadership on dramatically increasing our country's ability to deliver tests, for example, which on a per capita basis is so far behind others. Look, right now there's a conversation happening that I think is the wrong one about whether to open or stay closed. Reopening, just going back to normal, is not an option. Neither is staying closed forever. I mean, that's clear. So the question is, how do we safely reopen? That's where we need a president offering fact-based leadership and making sure that we do the coordination to get things like testing and equipment out there. And every day we have to get down the rabbit hole of clarifying that it is poisonous for anybody to have disinfectant inside their body, or trying to figure out why the Vice President of the United States went to the Mayo Clinic and walked around without wearing a mask.
Well, I was going to ask you.
I
was going to ask your opinion on your view on that, because obviously you've known Mike Pence as the governor of Indiana, and I'm curious why you think he did that.
The only motive I can think of is that it was to impress President Trump, or he thought that Donald Trump wouldn't like it if he did wear a mask. I cannot think of why else. It's not like they didn't tell him. The Mayo Clinic indicated that they made their guidelines clear. And, the way I think of it is, in the same way that as a mayor, I realized that I should never, I like to ride my bike a lot around town. And I realized I better make sure I got a helmet on. Even if I might have been a little careless about that in the past. When you are visiting a clinical environment up close with people, some of whom are vulnerable health-wise, this is not taking a walk around the block where you're 6 feet away from everybody else. This is important. And the only motivation I can think of is that he thought staying on the president's good side meant ignoring that medical advice.
Well, the president is taking a lot of credit for shutting down travel from China in late January, when he's been asked repeatedly about lost opportunities during the month of February. He continues to point at that move. Does he deserve credit for getting that for doing that in your view?
I mean, it misses the fact that it looks like most of the infections in this country actually came by way of Europe. Look, the travel restrictions are and may have been an important part of the response, but they really missed the boat in terms of what might have prevented this from exploding the way it did in the U.S. And more importantly, we've got to be looking forward. And this president is doing so little to draw us together, to lead this country, to support governors and mayors who need help. And that's why you see governors and mayors basically figuring out how to solve the problem without him. And what a sad commentary that is on presidential leadership, when you find that the only time a lot of serious-minded people even mention the president is making sure people don't follow boneheaded advice like shooting yourself up with disinfectant.
Do you think that Joe Biden, meanwhile, has been visible enough during this pandemic and has been out front enough and making his views and the Democratic Party in general, what the national response should have been if they had been in power?
Well, I think he's doing what he does best, which is calling America to a more compassionate place and describing what his approach would be to move the country forward. He's talked about how we can get this testing supply done. He's explained how a future vision of national security has to include global health security, as it did, by the way, during the Obama-Biden administration, when they set up in the national security a division that could deal in the National Security Council with these kinds of pandemics, only to have it dismantled when the Trump administration came in. Now, is he going to, the question of is he out there enough, I think largely is really a question of whether it's getting enough attention. And the truth of the matter is, if the president of the United States says something so foolish that it could get people killed, that will get more attention than a would-be president of the United States doing his job. But I don't think we should rate this based on how much attention it's getting. We should rate it based on whether it makes any sense. And between the two of them, there is no question. which person, Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, is making more sense when it comes to how to deal with the pandemic and when it comes to where our country needs to go.
Some media outlets have discussed whether or not it's appropriate to cover and carry President Trump's news conferences every day. And I'm curious what your view is on that. Obviously, you have a partisan view, but just in terms of responsibility from the media, how do you feel about that?
So I think it is something that has to be taken seriously. And at this point, there's been so much misinformation coming out of those briefings that it would be more responsible to cover after the fact anything important and factual that emerged. Remember, one of the basic things that we've learned about human psychology is that if you report on something that's not true, even if you say immediately afterwards that it isn't true. Remember, myth busting used to be a common way of getting information out. You'd lay out all the wrong information that's out there, and then you'd shoot all those wrong ideas down one by one. Well, something about the way our minds work, sometimes we remember the myth more than we do the busting. And so even if reporters do the responsible thing and say, the president said this and it's not true, that alone can contribute to the spread of misinformation. And I do think that it's more appropriate to report and repeat those things that are factual or consequential. And when these events are creating more confusion than they are spreading information, I think we're not doing a public service when we see them just broadcast everywhere.
You don't think there's any way that Vice President Biden could be more out in front? I don't necessarily buy, with all due respect, Pete, your claim that he's out there and it's not getting that much attention. I don't think he has been out there all that much talking about this issue. Should he be out there more? Should he be out front more?
Well, he's on television every day. He's on local
Joe
television,
Biden.
and he's doing local television, which I'm a big believer in too, in addition to national appearances, because it's another chance to reach people. But look, again, it's not the quantity, but the nature, I think, of some of what's going on that drives how much attention it gets. And part of how Donald Trump hacked our country, hacked our democracy, and hacked our media system is by discovering that doing something, even that most people don't like, doing it outrageously enough, gets you more attention than doing your actual job or doing things properly. That's not going to change. So the question is, will we change in terms of what we respond to?
A political analyst I spoke with said the president's argument for re-election will essentially be, I built the greatest economy in the history of the country. I responded aggressively to the pandemic. I'm the one who can rebuild the economy because I know how to do that. What will the Democratic pitch be?
Well, it's simple. The president cannot keep us safe, and we need to develop a new normal. Not just going back to the old way with the same winners and losers and the same weaknesses, but build an economy and a society strong enough that we're not vulnerable the way we were before. And not only did we have huge challenges in this country even before the pandemic came along, but we also have a president who's demonstrated that he's not prepared to keep us safe, which is the fundamental job of the presidency. It's national security. And in the 21st century, national security doesn't just mean dealing with foreign militaries or dealing with terrorism, which was my specialty when I was in uniform. It also means global health security. It means climate security. It means election security. And on each of those three things, the president has shown he is unwilling or unable to keep us safe. As to the economy, he caught the tail end of the Obama recovery. Remember, job growth was actually faster under Obama than it was under Trump. I suppose he managed not to destroy that in his first 3 years in office. If he wants to call that a win, fine. But it's not exactly the same thing as creating an economy that's going to make more Americans better off. And we've already seen that even when the numbers were looking good in the stock market, most Americans were falling further and further behind in terms of retirement, the cost of education, the cost of housing. And that was before we had this terrible shock of the pandemic.
Let's talk about the public health response. Obviously, Pete has dominated the news, but the economic impact could be longer lasting. What else can be done to deal with skyrocketing unemployment, businesses going belly up, and all the collateral damage that will be left in the wake of this tanking economy?
Well, first, we got to recognize that there's no substitute for national and federal leadership when it comes to keeping the economy moving. And that's why things like what's called the PPP, the funding that went to support employers and fund them to keep their employees on the rolls, was important. But we also saw how quickly that funding dried up. And it's why we need to continue reinforcing those sources of funding and making sure that they go to the businesses that need them most. Look, the reality was that money went through banks, and the banks were first to call up those that they had the strongest connections to, which meant often smaller businesses, minority-owned businesses, were left out because they didn't always have the same kind of clout. That's why I think the next generation, the next round of support, needs to focus on what are called CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions. They're often the ones who are supporting those small businesses and those minority-owned and women-owned businesses. You know, here in South Bend, the last decade, we spent so much effort when I was mayor building an economy, and small business was at the forefront of that. So we've got to make sure we're supporting that. We've got to make sure we're supporting individuals directly. And we've got to recognize that the economy we're going to come back to isn't going to be the same as it was before. And that doesn't have to be an altogether bad thing if we can build something that is stronger, that is fairer, that is better. Because this virus didn't just expose our weaknesses, it exploited them in a lot of ways. The fact that, for example, we're one of the few modern countries that doesn't have a lot of protections for workers when it comes to sick leave means that more people who were infected went to work because they had to. And that made us all worse off and more dangerous. Shame on us if we go back straight to the way we were doing things before.
Well, I was going to ask you, you know, this has exposed pretty stark disparities, income inequality in terms of healthcare, in terms of access to medical care, in terms of the communities of color that are being much more severely affected by this pandemic. Do you think that this is going to change the direction of the Democratic Party? You know, there was so much conversation during the campaign about moderates versus liberals, but do you think it will open up a bigger discussion about universal health care, about some of the positions that were advocated by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, since they have been shown in such stark relief in the midst of this crisis?
Well, I think certainly it continues to show why, for example, depending on employer-based healthcare as the solution for most Americans probably doesn't make sense for the long term. Now, we had differences in approach. I thought it would be best to allow people to choose whether they want to go on a public plan. But one thing that I agree with my more progressive competitors on is that public plan will probably be better for most Americans. You know, another thing we've seen is the importance of raising wages. Look, if Congress sets up an unemployment benefit to help keep people alive, and that turns out, as it often did, to be more than some people were making, that's not an indication that the benefit was too generous. It's an indication that poverty wages are unsustainable in this country. And I think that is something that's been exposed in a new way. And I think everything's on the table. I'm reconsidering some of my own views on things like debt relief. I think there were some real fairness issues in some of the proposals that got thrown around for.
Sorry, and what are you reconsidering?
In things like student debt relief, I've always felt that it needs to be targeted, focused on things like the for-profit schools that acted in bad faith, and that it would be unfair to move too quickly for relieving debt that was entered into in good faith, because it's unfair to the people who had just been able to repay. But I think right now we got to face the fact that we need to find new ways to get economic relief to people, and taking another look at how to more swiftly and directly deal with things like consumer debt or student debt. All of that's got to be on the table, because this is a crisis the likes of which we've not seen in our lives.
Well, how are you going to do that? I mean, the federal government, the deficit is obviously getting bigger and bigger and bigger and deeper and deeper. And, you know, how can there be a better safety net without, I mean, there's just not enough money to support the people who are hurting right now, Pete.
Well, the reason that there hasn't been enough money is the decision to slash taxes for very wealthy people. Look, the money's there. I mean, there's no mathematical reason why our country would be incapable of providing the kinds of benefits that every other industrialized country does. It's a choice. And it's as much a political choice as an economic one. Now, as Democrats go, I've always been one of the most likely to talk about the issue of debts and the deficit. I thought it was very important that all of my proposals penciled out by making sure the spending was reasonable and by making sure that we coupled it with responsible changes to taxes, especially for the wealthiest, so that it was all paid for. But I also have to say, even as somebody who's known as more hawkish on deficits in this party, now is not the time. We've got bigger problems to deal with. And there is going to be, as there is in wars, an increase in the debt load for this country at a time of low interest rates. We can handle it compared to the consequences of failing to act to shore up our economy when we need it.
Are you worried about November voter turnout, voter suppression if this thing goes on?
I'm very worried about voter suppression. It was a concern before. We saw a real mess in terms of what went on in Wisconsin. A lot of contradictory information and very little in-person voting available. So here's what I think needs to happen. First of all, we need to dramatically expand access to vote by mail. This is yet another example. We're there, good.
Oops.
This is another example of something that we should have done anyway, should have been doing all along, but now it's clear. Now, having said that, a couple other things I think are really important. If we move to vote by mail, but don't act to make sure there are safe means of in-person voting, that could be disenfranchising for some people. So we got to do both and. Another thing that's very important is making sure the kinds of voter suppression we saw in Georgia, people being purged from the rolls even though they are registered voters. Well, that's even harder to fight from the perspective of an individual voter in a vote by mail environment, which is why we need to make sure that we fight that up front with the kind of activism that organizations like Stacey Abrams' Fair Fight and Let America Vote and others are pursuing. And this shouldn't be a partisan thing. I do think it's been used as a partisan weapon, and Republicans have used voter suppression to prevent Democrats from winning. But I don't think you have to be from one party or the other to care about making sure that every eligible voter gets to vote.
You know, looking back on the campaign, I'm just curious now that you've had some time to kind of think about it and analyze what you did or didn't do. Why do you think you were never quite able to expand your base and to get more people of color to support you? Do you think that you didn't reach out early enough in the campaign process?
Well, I think you can always do better, and I've thought a lot about how we could have reached out further. It's also the case that Joe Biden had an extraordinary level of trust built up over decades with, in particular, the Southern black voters who came out for him in a big way in South Carolina and helped deliver the nomination. And for candidates who were newer on the scene, it was very few candidates, even African-American candidates, ever got past kind of single-digit levels of support, competing with somebody who has a deep level of trust there. And I recognize that often that kind of trust can only be earned over time with voters, in particular, who have felt taken for granted and left out. And with good reason, they worried about this time and time again. And I saw that skepticism in the conversations that we were having. At the same time, I'm also proud of what we were able to put forward from a policy perspective, especially when it comes to tackling the racial inequality we have in this country. And I hope that those policy ideas continue to live on, whether they're connected to me or not.
I know we have some questions from social. We have a few decent questions from the comments, although as someone said, it's a bit of a cesspool out there, but you know how it goes. There's speculation that you may move out of South Bend to another state and run for office there. Is that something you're considering?
No, I don't know. I don't have any plan to run for office anywhere at the moment. And this is home. Matter of fact, this is feeling more like home than ever because I've actually been able to be here and with Jess and kind of make the house our own. Look, I care deeply about this community, and you know, running for president was not about just me wanting to have that office. It was a particular thing that happened at a particular moment, and whether I get an opportunity to run again for any office in the future is going to be about what I have to offer, not some 12-point plan that I've calculated sitting here in my study in South Bend.
I think a lot of people were wondering, and many of your supporters hoping that you'd be tapped as the vice presidential candidate. As you well know, Joe Biden has said that he's going to pick a woman. He pledged that. How important is it in your view, Pete, for him to select a woman of color for his running mate?
Well, I strongly support his decision to select a woman because I think gender balance is important. I don't just mean as a political thing. I think that it's been proven that organizations make better decisions when there's more gender balance in their leadership. And it's a great way to demonstrate that. And I know there are extraordinary women, many of them women of color, some of whom ran for president and got known that way, some of whom are not household names, or at least not in the same way as the best known names in the party, but who could do a phenomenal job. And it's certainly not my place to advise somebody who knows the vice presidency better than almost anybody alive.
What about your former sparring partner, Amy Klobuchar? I know she's on the short list.
You know, she'd make a great running mate. She'd make a great vice president and president. And so
no hard feelings from those debates.
No, I mean, look, in the heat of competition, debating can be fierce, just as competing can be fierce. But she is somebody who I have respected and liked, even before either one of us is running for president. You know, there's a lot of talk about a candidate you would want to have a beer with. We actually did have a beer when she came out here campaigning for Joe Donnelly back in 2018. So, of course, there's a tug of war, and sometimes there's a dust up in the middle of a debate. But
I was going to say 2018 was 2 years ago. I mean, what about since those debates, Pete?
No, I mean, look, let's be clear. The differences and the disagreements that we've had, whether it's between her and me or between any two people on the Democratic side who ran for president, are tiny compared to the gulf between us and the current president. And we've got to team up at a moment like this. And this is also my message to progressives who may be frustrated that their preferred candidate did not emerge. Look, I get it. My preferred candidate didn't emerge either in terms of my first choice. But if you look at what we can achieve in a Biden presidency, we may disagree over the details about how to get universal health care, but we're running against somebody who wants to take it away. We may disagree over exactly what the right path is to tackle our climate challenge, but we're running against somebody who denies that climate change even exists. We may have these meaningful differences on our side of the aisle, but they are like this compared to the gulf between us and what will continue if we allow this president to get a second term.
Let me get some questions from social, since we solicited some questions and I don't want people to think we're not using them. What's been your favorite cocktail during quarantine, Pete?
So Chaston figured out how to make a really good Negroni. So that's
I did that. I followed Stanley Tucci's instructions.
I think that's where it all began. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Stanley Tucci has single-handedly made Negroni's the most popular cocktail of the pandemic.
I'm here for it. I think it's great.
What do you miss most about being on the campaign trail?
Just wonderful people that we met along the way. Everything from other Democratic leaders, even my competitors who I came to admire and like, even when we were having it out on a campaign trail. An amazing staff. Our People for America team really lived by what we like to call the rules of the road. There were a set of values that we laid out, beginning with respect, teamwork, belonging. A whole set of things that really held our team together, and I miss them every day. Our volunteers, voters, wonderful people, and you know, the consolation in this time has been that there are other ways to be in touch with them. And again, with Win the Era, we're finding ways to carry that work forward too. But as much as I missed my own bed when I was on the trail, I do miss those interactions now that I'm here at home.
Yeah, questions. We've been asking a lot of tough questions. These are from social media, so everybody relax. This is actually a really good question because I've been thinking about this, and of course, with your military background, what did you think of the handling of the USS Roosevelt outbreak?
I mean, it was shameful. Look, the first thing you learn as an officer is that your primary responsibility is to take care of the people that you're in charge of. As an officer in the Navy, you take care of your sailors. And I'll give you a simple example of how this is kind of inculcated in military culture. One of the customs that, and I never saw it written, I actually never saw it as a regulation, but it's just understood, is that if there's an environment where everybody's being served food at the same time, the officers eat last. And it's just one little example of how when you're in charge, you remind yourself that you're in charge foremost for the benefit of those under you. And that's exactly what Captain Crozier did. He stood up and he said, my sailors and Marines and the others assigned to my care are in danger, and we need to do something about that. He sounded the alarm. He did not go, he went through a chain of command, but he drew attention to an issue. And to see the politicization, the way that he was drummed out, and then the way that he was so disrespectfully spoken of by the political appointee who has since resigned as Secretary of the Navy, I think was just one more example of how little respect the military actually gets under this president. He treats them as props. He pardons war criminals. He punishes war heroes. And in the case of the Roosevelt, somebody who was doing his job, looking out for his sailors.
Having said that, though, should he have gone up the chain of command and made it less public in terms of his concerns?
I think he was motivated by the desire to do whatever it took to take care of those who he was responsible for. Whether you CC the wrong combination of people on an email is maybe a management question or a political question that is just different from the core of what this is about, which is somebody trying to make sure that his people were going to be okay.
A lot of people have asked if you're going to run again in 2024. Care to weigh in on that, Pete?
Nope. Look, I'll say this. Every time I've decided to run for office, it's been a process of thinking about what I had to offer and how it might meet the moment. And often that same process has led me to decide not to run for office. But right now, 2020 is upon us. It is even more unbelievably important than we knew it to be 2 months ago. And so to the extent that I have anything to do with presidential politics, it's doing everything in my power to make sure that Joe Biden is elected our next president.
I'm just curious, it seems to me that pandemics or a crisis like this can either pull people together or separate them further. And it seems to me that the conversation and even some of the comments that I'm reading when I'm not listening to you, it seems that this has actually intensified the divisions in this country in some ways in terms of responding to the way the Trump administration has been handling this crisis. Do you think that we're just forever going to be intensely polarized and that this sense of the United States as one nation will ever come to pass again?
I think it's up to us. And I think the future of this country depends on us finding a way to do that. Look, the way that we get our information has changed. In so many ways, the way we interact has changed. But certain things have not changed. The extent to which we actually rely on one another's goodwill and integrity and participating in a democracy means all of us taking responsibility. That hasn't changed. It's only grown more obvious in the era of this pandemic. And so what we've learned is, especially depending who our leader is in the White House, it's not automatic that an emergency will bring us together. But it's certainly not automatic that an emergency has to drive us apart. And what we need now, if we're not getting it out of the Oval Office, is to seek leadership at every level, inside and outside of government, locally and nationally, that has that basic quality of calling us to our higher values and reminding us what we care about and reminding us to put a bigger picture in front of us. If we have that, I think we can get through this. And there's just no other option because America isn't America if we're at each other's throats.
I hear your dog in the background, by the way.
Yeah, that's Buddy. He's vigilantly guarding the front porch there.
Meanwhile, a couple of people are commenting you seem to have a different hairstyle. Did you cut your own hair or did Chasten cut your hair?
Chasten did it, but I made him. I said, I think we really got to have a go at this. He took out the clippers. He said, listen, if you let me do this, it's probably not going to come out the way you'd hope. So there was fair warning, but I said, let's go for it. And you're looking at the consequences.
Yeah. And finally, other people asked on social media about if Joe Biden is elected in November, would you be interested in serving in his cabinet? Somebody asked about Secretary of State. In fact, someone said CNN has recently reported that Democrats want to groom you as Secretary of State or Defense, and people are asking for your thoughts on that.
Look, I want to make myself useful to the public any way I can, but I don't want to put the cart before the horse because the way to do that right now is to make sure that Joe Biden is the next president of the United States. And then whether it's inside of government or outside, I'll find a way to make myself useful. But right now, we've got a very clear task in front of us, and I'm doing everything I can to make it happen. In addition to the candidates up and down the ticket, I always said on the campaign, we can't treat the presidency like it's the only office that matters. And what Win the Era is about is supporting candidates who may not be getting the attention because of this moment that we're in, but who deserve our support and can make a big impact.
I just interviewed Gavin Newsom, and he was saying last year nobody knew who the governors were, and suddenly governors are in the spotlight as never before. And I also interviewed London Breed, the mayor of San Francisco. And I think mayors at your old job and governors are really taking an unprecedented role. And I think it's really actually teaching people a lesson in civics in some ways.
That's absolutely right, and it's not only because I think it's made more important because of the lack of leadership in the White House, but it's true regardless. Look, so many of these decisions are actually made locally. It's the same with elections. We were talking earlier about disenfranchisement, making sure elections were secure. I think this is a moment to remember that in our country, elections are generally run by counties and states with just some federal guidelines as kind of left and right boundaries. The local has never been more important, and we've seen so many mayors stepping up. I'm so glad that you spoke with Mayor Breed of San Francisco, got such high marks for the quick action she took. Governor Newsom's a great example of somebody who's been stepping out and solving problems instead of waiting for the White House to do it when it comes to getting gear to where it needs to be, engaging with the private and public sector. And I will say that there have been governors and mayors on both sides of the aisle who don't get caught up in the partisan.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's really a very important thing to point out, that Republican governors and mayors have also done an outstanding job.
Yeah, especially when they are leading with facts and going by what science and medicine and experts have to say. And a lot of them will privately tell you their frustration with what's coming out of the White House, but they're not letting it stop them from doing the right thing at home.
All right. Well, Pete Buttigieg, thanks so much, Pete. It's been fun talking to you. I know you'd want to get deep into public policy. For people who may have missed our conversation, we're going to have a link to this IG Live tomorrow in our newsletter, Wake Up Call. You can go to katiecouric.com. I know you're a daily reader, right, Pete?
Absolutely, yeah. Keep an eye out.
He's like, what? You are now, Pete. You are now. Chasten, and you have to sign up for the newsletter. But we appreciate all the comments, even the trolls, At least we're getting their attention, right? And usually we have a lot of very smart people. We did tonight as well. And so appreciate the questions we got from everybody watching. Pete, thanks a lot. And tell Chasten I said, hey.
I will do. Yeah, I know he really enjoyed speaking with you recently, and
yeah,
look forward to seeing you in person one day. But he's all over this Instagram thing.
I know he's like the talk show host of Instagram. I know he interviewed Jill Biden the other day, so he's having fun with it. Meanwhile, you got a lot of reading to do, if judging from your bookshelf. So
yeah, no kidding. It's waiting for us.
All right. Thanks
Great
again.
seeing you. Thanks so much.
Pete. Okay, thanks everybody. Bye. Hi everyone, it's 5:02. How are you guys? I'm pretty jazzed because